All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Christian Cornerstone podcast brought to you by Mr. Bill Ricksecker, Christian Cornerstone 412 Ministries, otherwise known as cc412.org. Now, we're going to get into a quite lengthy series. In fact, you can see the description below this video, and also if you're watching this podcast, you obviously know what the title is as well. But before we get into this, I want to encourage you guys that if you are listening to this for your first time, feel free to subscribe to us on YouTube, Facebook, and strongly encourage you to subscribe to us on Spotify. We have a goal to reach a 100 listener count, and the purpose of that would be to open up some additional avenues, additional elements in which we can provide here within this podcast. And also in regards to this ministry, if you feel as if this is beneficial for you, if you have faith in this ministry, I'd encourage you to help support us. You can find the link actually in the description below. Those of you who are listening on Spotify or any other podcasting platform, you also have the links as well. This video series, this lengthy series, and this is actually going to be over probably the rest of the year. And we'll talk more about that here in a minute. But this will be available on Spotify, all the other podcasting platforms we have. It'll be on YouTube, and it'll be on Facebook as well. And this was actually a course in which I've put together, and kind of put together. You see, about a month or two ago, I think is what it is. Maybe a little bit longer than that, maybe 3 months. I asked this gentleman, this author of this book, I was like, hey, I've read this book. It is an amazing resource. It is very well written. And in fact, I've actually recommended this to a lot of people. There have been a number of people that I've met since reading this book. There have been a number of people that I've met that are struggling, and both men and women who are struggling in their relationship, not sure how to go about these things. In some cases, the marriage has been falling apart, and I've recommended these books. I was like, hey, this is something that's very helpful. In whether you're in a relationship or not, whether you're a man or a woman, and I say that because we'll talk more about that here in a minute, but whether you're a man or a woman, these books here are very important to help prepare you as a Christian to be the man or woman that you need to be in a relationship. We have young individuals who are simply looking for that significant other. We have others who are dating, and we also have those who are married. And regardless of what stage that you're in, these books can be very helpful in helping you to identify what is my role in this marriage, or what is my role in this relationship, and what do I need to do to prepare. So, with that being said, I actually asked for one of these particular books. I asked the author permission to develop a course based off of his material, and giving full credit to the book to this individual. We'll talk about this here in the next slide here. But giving full credit to this individual for this content, I'm simply a man that's sharing this information. And over the next, probably the rest of the year, actually, we'll have to censor some of the things to avoid some sort of copyright. Obviously, give him some credit for this material. But I also want to limit some of it because I don't want to go into a whole exposition. This is actually going to be a free series, a free course for anybody to take hold of. But because it is free and because it is our own content, I don't want to give you information somebody has worked hard for and is selling in a book when you can get it from me for free. So we're going to censor some of these things for copyright purposes, out of respect for this individual and the hard work he's done, and also to encourage you to get your own copy of this book. So what is it that I am talking about? I'll tell you what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the exemplary husband. And this book itself is going to be really our guide, our handbook as we go throughout the rest of the year, talking about what it means to be an exemplary husband, or as I've titled it, actually I don't even remember what I titled it as, Blueprints for a Godly Husband. That's what we got here. This is the husband's book, The Exemplary Husband by Stuart Scott, the foreword by John MacArthur. As you all know, I'm a huge fan of MacArthur's ministry. He has actually helped me out a lot in understanding various texts. I'm so grateful for that. Um, but this book itself, Stuart Scott is the author of this, and as you can tell here, it is a biblical perspective on how to be an exemplary husband. Now, I'd encourage you to get yourself a copy. With much of it, there's going to be much that you will learn from this book. Perhaps even some other aspects not even discussed within this series, and it is absolutely 100% a great tool to help you, equip you to be a godly husband, or even a resource to share with others. And as I said, not just a godly husband, but also a godly wife. While this series is going to be directed towards men, women, there's going to be some material in which you can learn from, you can glean from, you can come to an understanding. And we can take a couple different approaches with this. Now, while this is a series for the men, women, you can learn from this as well. You can learn this is what I need to look for in a Christian husband. Or if you're a Christian woman and you're in a relationship with, obviously you're another man, you want to help them. It says, hey, I really care about you. I really like you. I want to pursue a relationship with you, but I'm concerned that you might not be ready. This would be another aspect in which you can learn, because you can point them to this as, hey, this is what the Bible says. Stuart Scott, wonderful man, wonderful resource, and I'd encourage you to do this. Is if we're going to pursue this relationship, then you need to have a better outlook on what it means to be a Christian husband. Because that's the ultimate goal. Our goal is to get married. Our goal is to be husband and wife. And you need to have a right understanding. And so I'd encourage that. In fact, actually, now that I think of it, my own grandmother, she's passed away and she's went to the Lord now a couple years ago. But she did that with my grandfather. I remember hearing my grandfather at the time when he first knew her, first met her. He wasn't a Christian. He was just your average, I don't know his lifestyle back then, but he wasn't a believer. And he saw this woman, and he's like, I want her. I'm going to pursue her. And from what I was told, my grandmother was very stubborn. And she said, from what I was told, she wouldn't even let him in the door until he essentially met her demands. And the demands were, it's like, hey, I need a Christian husband. And if you really want me to say yes if you want to take me out on a date, then you need to come to church with me. And then ultimately through that experience, as time progressed, he was saved. They've developed a relationship. They got married, and they served the Lord faithfully throughout the rest of their lives. And in fact, my grandfather's a big role model. He's passed away as well, but he's very. I looked up to him a lot. So I would encourage you guys to get this copy. Again, we'll have the link in the description below. Women, again, you can learn from this too. You can glean some information from this. You can apply some of these things, because we'll talk about some of these things, how men are to treat women, how your man is to lead you. And with that being said, you as a woman need to be willing to be led. You need to be willing to submit yourself and to not be as critical. So we'll talk about some of these aspects, but just in case, I actually want to make this known here. Just in case, wrong slide, still the wrong slide, there we go. We will be talking about the exemplary husband, and again, the link will be in the description, and I think we'll actually put both these links in here. We also have the women's version. This is by Martha Peace, and these two books kind of complement each other. I don't know how they related. I don't know particularly what involvement each of them have, but they're essentially laid out to be the same. Stuart Scott wrote The Exemplary Husband, and then we also have The Excellent Wife by Martha Peace. This book here is the woman's edition to what we're discussing. Now, I will let you know I have not read The Exemplary or The Excellent Wife. That's still pending on my to-do list, because I am actually a little curious what she has to write. But I have read The Exemplary Husband. I found it to be absolutely amazing, and so much that I have just about every single page underlined and marked up. In fact, as I was looking through preparing this video, I actually found myself writing up a little bit more within the book, some things that I overlooked or missed in my first reading. So we're going to go over this. Again, this book itself is going to have a lot more than what we're going to be discussing here in this series. It is going to be a long series. It's going to be a worthwhile series. And I want to encourage you guys to get a copy of this book. I've given this book out to a number of individuals, and some of them I'm in contact with. Some of them just requested a copy. Unfortunately, I don't have the funds to continue to do that at this point in time. So I do apologize in advance. But I've heard from some of them is like, this is very helpful, very rich. Thank you, and so on. So I just really want to extend this. We want to dive a little deeper into what it means to be a exemplary husband and to prepare you to meet that goal, meet that role that you are to be. And if you're already married, there's still going to be something in here in which you can learn from. I've actually found myself single man. I'm a single man, but I've actually found myself through my reading of this. I was like, well, there are some things here I agree 100% with. I'm already putting into practice. And then there are some other things that were very convicting. It says, okay, this is the things that I need to work on in my pursuit of righteousness in order to be the man that my future wife needs me to be. So very, very wonderful. I can't really say too much more about that, but let's go ahead and dive into this and check out what the purpose. Now, again, I always forget this. I love this little laser pointer. So I wonder if I can actually change this color. I don't think I can. Let's see if there's more. No, I can't. I can't change the color of my little laser pointer. So the purpose of this series, what is this purpose? Number one, as we mentioned, it is for all men, single, dating, or married. If you're single, that is good, because this series that we're doing is going to prepare you to be the godly man that you need to be. If you're dating, there's always room for more improvement. You are still in the dating phase, and you're not married, you're not tied down, you are not bound to an individual, but I'm willing to bet that you have this desire to be married to, or you have this desire to be bound to them. And so this book itself will be helpful for you as well. You'll see some things in which you're doing, which you have put into practice, but you also find some ways in which you're failing. And when you find those things, and it's not something to get beat up over, but it's something that you need to say is like, okay, this is what I need to work on. And when you find those things, I would personally encourage you to find yourself a mentor, somebody who can hold you accountable, who can guide you and help you to reach those potential goals, those feats of this is where I'm failing, how can I succeed? And also married. If you're married, awesome, you're yoked together. But there's always something that you need to work on. And this is not going to be something that's going to be an overnight thing. We need to remember that. But this is for you. This is for all men. I'm skipping a couple things. I'm clicking the actual wheel on my mouse, which that's what's doing this problem. So we're going to leave my mouse go. But like I said, with this book, you'll identify your downfalls, your sins, and find out how you can overcome them, and it will prepare you for marriage. And again, if you are in marriage, this book itself, both man and woman, this book itself can help to strengthen your marriage. And one of the things that we must really recognize is, in regards to relationships, the ultimate goal is to get married, and as the Lord commands, to be fruitful and multiply, to bless each other, to be like God to them. As Moses was like God to Israel, we too are like God to our spouses, and how we treat them, and the love and the compassion that we have for them, and the care and the guidance, the leadership and the submission, and so on. So these are some of the things in which we want to recognize. We want to actually really understand that saying I do is a huge commitment. Saying I do is to say, I recognize your downfalls, but I love you anyways. I recognize where you fail me, but I still love you, and I want to support you. I understand you have struggles, but I love you, and I want to be there for you. I want to help support you in these things. And, all sorts of different aspects, because I do itself, we've really taken marriage itself doesn't mean what it used to. I think it was back in the 1950s or 60s, from that time previously, marriage was a big thing. And it was almost unheard of people getting divorced. I mean, and it also provided a stigma, and it still does today, and I think rightly so. Because those who are in divorces, and the situations can vary. I'm not saying because you have a divorce that this stigma should fit or we're throwing you under the bus. But if you're divorced, and let me actually put it this way: if you're divorced, if you have abandoned your spouse, if you have abandoned your spouse, then this is really this divorce that you've been through really shows that you don't have a strong value to relationships as you should. And this is something where we need to get into a different mindset. Now, I'm not saying just because you have been divorced that you don't value relationships. In fact, I know of a couple who had the wife abandon their marriage, and it was the husband who filed for a divorce. And he tried to do everything he possibly could to say, hey, we need to work through these things. We need to get these counselings and so on, and all these different aspects that come with preserving and strengthening the marriage. But the spouse wanted nothing to do with it. The wife chose to abandon it, chose to, label this person, with a very negative mindset, and a bunch of other things that came with it. But so I wouldn't necessarily say the one who files for divorce is the one who is abandoning it or the one who is showing a lack of value in the relationship. But I want us, rather than pointing fingers at anybody, I want us to think about this. How much do I value relationships? How much do I value the woman that I'm with or the man that I'm with? How much do I value my husband or my wife? And think about these things. Is how much do you treat them like dirt? How much do you listen to them, or how much do you ignore them? How much when you guys get in arguments, how many times do you pack up a bag and go stay with mom and dad, or your sister or your brother, or whoever it is? These kinds of things, I mean, they can be helpful to pack up a bag and go cool off for the weekend. But if that's really our scapegoat, then we're really missing the point of what it means to be married. So we also have here, this is what we're going over with this book, these next 4 points. We're going to have a section called the husband's recognition. We need to, actually, let me look at the context here, or the contents, table of contents. We need the husband itself, and women also need to recognize their present condition. They need to recognize who they are in God, who God is. They need to have a right understanding of who God is. You need to have a right understanding of what mankind is, the depravity that we have in our sins, relationships, marriage, and even our roles within it. So that's really just kind of a snippet, little spoiler alert for what we're going to be going over with later. But we're going to be talking about the husband's recognition. We're going to be talking about the husband's responsibilities as a husband, obviously, and also women. Again, this is directed towards husbands, but you can still benefit from this because, for example, with leading in a relationship, that's the husband's role. That's the man's role. That's not yours. So while you can guide, you can help your husband to understand certain things, but he ultimately has the final decision. And as a woman in the relationship, and there's obviously some boundaries within this, but the husband himself, his duty is to lead the marriage. And your job is to support that. Your job is to submit to that. And you need to allow him to lead. When a decision is made, for example, you're looking at houses, the husband says, well, we're going to go with this one, house A rather than house B. But you like house B more because it's got certain features rather than house A. He's the one who makes that final decision. And yes, he's supposed to listen to you and so on, but it's his duty to lead the marriage. Now, if he chooses house A because there's more space, there's a garage or an extra room for crafting or whatever you have, or your kids, or the kitchen's bigger, whatever you have, or if he chooses it because it's more affordable, it's more well kept, or it's a little cheaper, and he's got the experience and the resources to repair certain aspects, whatever it might be. You as a woman, your job is to simply say, okay, honey, I trust you. And I'm going to I'm going to follow you in this because I love you. And then likewise, there's a bunch of other examples we can give, but ultimately, he's the one that's, to make the decisions, and he's responsible for leading that marriage. We're also going to talk about the husband's resolves, and these kinds of things, as I open up the table of contents, would be turning a couple pages here. The husband's resolves, his humility and his service. We'll talk about sensitivity. We'll talk about helping his wife deal with her sin. That's a very important one. Communication and conflict resolution. And then also the husband's regrets. This is talking about some various sins that might be in his past, that might be in his present, whatever it might be. And I don't necessarily think, I would not personally label these ones as the absolute category. We'll talk more about that many months from now. But I would say that, there's there's four distinct things. The husband's regrets, referring to particular sins. We'll actually leave that for another time, but these are the things in which we're going to be discussing here in this series. And then finally, the biggest thing here is just a 4-part, 20 chapters, and I want to do the best that I possibly can. We're already 20 minutes into this. I want to do the best that I possibly can. In fact, this is probably just going to be an introduction here because we're almost done with this. In fact, let me actually avoid spoilers and see where we're at here on this. Okay, we're going to kind of zip through this. We were kind of at 20 minutes into this. I just wanted to make sure we had time here. So we're going to zip through these next slides. And again, I want to encourage you guys to get the book because you'll find a lot more information within this book throughout this series. What I'm providing here is just kind of a snippet, cliff notes, as well as my own commentary. So we also have the wrong spoilers. Okay, so one of the things as men and women, you need to be ready to change. You need to be ready. If there's something, some problem within your life, you need to be ready to make that change. If you're not a husband if you're not a one-woman man, and that's referring to simply if you're married or in a relationship, but you're flirting with others, that's something that you need to change. If you're not listening to your husband or wife enough, you need to be willing to change. If your spouse has a concern, you need to be willing to change. Husband and wife both. This goes for you. No person is perfect. No person will ever be perfect. And that's something we need to recognize within ourselves. Rather than simply pointing out the faults in our spouse, we need to look more into ourselves. And that's actually biblical, referring to Matthew 18. Matthew chapter 7, the hypocrisy. Before we try to get the splinter out of our brother's eye, and this could be our spouse too, our husband or wife, before we try to get the splinter out of their eyes, we need to get the plank out of our own. In other words, we need to look at our own sins before we look at the sins of the other. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be sinless. That doesn't mean before you address the sin that you need to be perfect and sinless. But it does mean that you need to have your sins under control. We need to take accountability. As believers, as Christians, as husbands and wives, we need to take accountability for our actions and take criticism seriously. This is actually, I actually added this one, to take criticism seriously, because, and this is one of the examples I give a lot. I remember an individual about couple years ago, 2 or 3 years, about 2 or 3 years ago now. He said something to me, and it's like, hey, you're a Christian, you're studying to be a pastor and so on. These are things in which you shouldn't be doing, or this is something you shouldn't do, you shouldn't say, whatever. And I got to thinking about that. I was like, you're right. I appreciate that. There was that accountability, but there was also another side of things in which somebody gave me a little bit of it was a negative criticism. And I got to thinking about it, and I studied the scriptures a little bit, and we're not going to go too much into that, but when somebody brings something up, however it is, be willing to evaluate that. Be willing to say, is this true about me? Look at yourself and perhaps even seek a third party, because sometimes we, in our pride, can be blind to our sin. So if somebody's bringing something to account, be willing to talk to somebody about it and say, hey, this is what was said of me. I want to make sure that my own pride's not getting in the way and that I'm just brushing it off. What are your thoughts? What do you see? So these are some of the things in which we need to recognize as well, because sometimes having that third party can be very beneficial. Actually, a lot of times it can. So we also need to accept the challenge, and I promise you this will not be easy. We're going to be talking about some things that will be very convicting, very challenging, and it might not rest well with you. But these are some of the things in which you, as a husband and wife, need to recognize. And I want to make this perfectly clear. If you're not willing to accept the challenge, if you're not willing to change where change is needed, this series is not for you. Because this is for the one who wants to be a better spouse in their marriage, in their relationship. And if you're not willing to change, if you're not willing to grow in spiritual maturity, I got to say this is not something that you're going to benefit from. And be ready to fail, because success does not happen overnight. Now we can see something, and in fact, actually, I want to give an example here. This is success does not happen overnight. I'm actually in the hobby of 3D printing models. I don't claim to be a professional. I've learned quite a bit, but when I first got started, it took me months to calibrate and to get the fine tuning down of the basics of 3D printing. And there was a lot of trial and error. In fact, I have a lot of scraps from faulted parts. And even now, I mean, there's still some minor mishaps when mechanical malfunctions or what have you. But ultimately, I failed a lot. And you're going to fail a lot, because success doesn't happen overnight. In fact, I think I'm actually at about a year, maybe a year and a half into this hobby, and I'm still learning new things as far as how to go about it. So, I mean, that's just one example that we can give, and we need to recognize it. In fact, I don't remember. I think it was Einstein. It could be I could be wrong on the Einstein thing. It might be maybe Thomas Edison or something. One of them said is that they haven't failed 100 times or 1,000 times. They've just simply found 100 or 1,000 times in which does not work, in which is wrong. So that's one of the things you need to recognize. So even though you might fail 1, 2, 3, 4 times, that just means that there's 1, 2, 3, 4 times that this is not the right way. Perhaps it's the 5th time or the 6th time. But you must be ready to change. You must be ready to grow. And then finally here, be ready to remain single. If you're not ready, then you're not ready. Now, I actually was listening to a podcast about a month ago now, I think is what it has been. There was an individual who was, it was a Wretched Radio with Todd Friel. He had a person send a letter or call in or something anonymously and say, hey, I have this struggle. There's this person I'm in a relationship with, but I have this particular struggle. How can I go about overcoming this? What are your thoughts? And Todd Friel made it quite simple. What he said was, and I actually enjoyed it a lot, one of the things he said is like, hey, you need to break off that relationship because you're not ready. And I was like, that's good. That's good advice. I actually approve of what he said. I was like, I agree with that, because there's particular things within our lives, both man and woman, that if we have a particular struggle or a particular sin that's not yet, we don't yet have the reins on it, then that just means that if we get into a relationship, that particular sin is going to be in that relationship as well. And that's ultimately going to make things fall apart. So if you're looking for a relationship, if you're single, be ready to remain single. Because if you go into a relationship and you don't have these particular things under control and managed, again, you're going to be bringing that negativity or that toxicity or that, I don't want to say that, garbage, that sewage into that relationship, and that relationship is just going to go to garbage as well. So, and I would talk to your pastor, talk to your counselor, mentor, father, mother, whoever, get their thoughts. It says, hey, mom, dad, pastor, teacher, mentor, whoever it is, I've got this thing I'm struggling with. What are your thoughts? But again, I'd encourage you and really get their thoughts on, hey, how can I do this? How can I overcome these things? But ultimately, right off the bat, if you have a particular sin struggle that's a continuous thing, get that taken care of first, so that way you can clean up your act, so to speak, and you can have a healthy, clean marriage, clean relationship. So, and I don't say that negatively. I mean, this is ultimately for your good, because in the long run, you are going to be, you're going to look back and say, well, I'm so glad that I waited. So that's what we have right there. And also be ready to lead the way. If you are not being led, you should not lead. That's actually a very important thing. I remember talking to an individual some time ago. It's like, hey, I'd encourage you to get a mentor and, be an understudy of your pastor. And this individual was like, I'm at a stage in my life where I don't need that. I so built up with pride. And you see this in some of the things he posts. He claims to be a minister. He claims to be mature in the spirit. But yet some of the things in which he shares on social media really go to suggest the otherwise. And he's trying to lead other people, but yet he's not willing to be led. And that's one of the things that I think that's actually very important for all men and women, is that we need to be taught. We need to be mentored. And I would say for husbands, for men, that you need to be ready to, if you want to lead, then you need to be led. Because you are setting the example that you want in your relationship. And for you to look to an elder for guidance is the most humbling thing, because you're recognizing, I don't have it all together. I don't know everything, and I need help. I need accountability. And if you can do that, then your family will as well. Your wife or your wife might come to you and say, is like, hey, I need this accountability. I need this help. Or they might even have another woman mentoring them. And even your children will do that as well. They'll see that it's very valuable. They'll say, hey, Dad, I really like that you're recognizing you don't have it all together. And I love the fact that you're going to, Pastor Joe, and you're seeking his counsel. I admire that, and I want that for my life too. Will you be the one who leads me? And, it'll show humble submission, because if you're not willing to submit to somebody, then don't expect them to submit to, don't expect others to submit to you. And that can go with the same thing with the Christian life. The most important thing, if we're not willing to submit to God and his leadership and his guidance and his righteousness, we should not be expecting our spouse to do the same. That's just going to be a hypocritical lifestyle. All right, so going on to this, God's will. In fact, I do need to hurry up on this. We're about 33 minutes into this. God's will for the Christian husband. God's will for every Christian husband. This is paraphrased from Ephesians 5:23 or through 33. This is from Stuart Scott. He says, God's will for every Christian husband is to shepherd and love his wife the way Christ shepherds and loves the church. And that's a very important thing that we need to recognize as men, as women, is our role. Jesus Christ is the husband to the church. In fact, actually, I think I have that. I want to, hold on. There we go. Okay. I had to go back because I don't remember sharing that. I don't remember if I put that on there. But like Christ is the husband to the church, which is the bride, including you husbands, you are the bride of Christ as well. Likewise, we as husbands are, or as husbands are we're the husbands to the wife. The church is the husband. Jesus Christ is the husband to the church, and men, you are the husband to your wife. I hope that analogy works. The point is, we need to recognize our role. And like the church submits to the husband, which is Christ, for leadership and guidance, so too does the woman submit to their husband for the leadership and guidance. And they accept it. It says, I don't understand everything, but I trust you. And that sometimes that's how it is for the Christian life. Within our Christian faith, or the church itself says, this is what the Bible says. This is what Jesus Christ has asked me to do. I don't fully understand it. I don't, at my level of understanding, I can't say I necessarily agree with it, but I'm going to trust that you know what's best. So we need to have that recognition. Husbands, you are to lead the shepherds and to love the church. Likewise, you are to love your wife, which is your church. And women also, you are to submit to the authority and the guidance and the leadership of your husband as you would Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the husband. You are the church. Your husband, obviously, is your husband. And he, in the particular roles, he is the role of Jesus Christ. Now, I do want to say that both play a role as God in the sense that you are to emulate mercy, love, compassion, forgiveness, all of these attributes that God gives us. You, both man and woman, are to do the same thing to your spouse. Because God himself knows us deeply. He knows the deepest, darkest secrets. And likewise, our spouse, husband and wife, knows the deepest, darkest secrets of our lives and yet still loves us anyways. So that's something I want you to chew on here. I don't necessarily think we'll go too much into that. But John 1, chapter 2, verse 6. 1 John 2, verse 6, whoever abides in him ought to walk in the way in which he walked. In other words, if you claim to be a believer, if you claim to be a follower of Jesus Christ, you must walk in the same way in which Jesus himself walked. How did Jesus walk? Well, to the church, he was the leader, he was the guide, he was the decision maker, he was the teacher. But yet to the Father, he humbled himself in submission. And we'll talk about this. How did Jesus walk? Well, Jesus is that ultimate example, and this is for both men and women. One, he fulfilled his role of servanthood. It says in John 13:15, for I have given you an example, that you also should do just as I have done for you. In other words, if Jesus Christ did it, we ought to as well. If Jesus Christ didn't do it, then we ought to as well. He also came to suffer. For this you have been called. John, actually, I don't even think I have the verse on there. I don't. For this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was there any deceit found in him. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. And when he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to the one who judges justly. This is very important. Husbands, wives, there's going to be times in which you don't even want to be around your spouse. But you need to recognize, I love them completely. I said I do. And I want to fulfill that. And we know, and I want to say this because, we'll talk more about that later on in another point. But we are called to suffer. Men and women both. We're called to be sacrificial. It's not just the men that need to sacrifice, but the women also. Because there's no distinction within the scriptures that says, husbands, sacrifice everything for your wife. It's a mutual thing. And sometimes this suffering needs to happen. Now, I'm not saying that we should remain in abusive relationships. I was actually just talking to an individual just the other day who was asking for advice. I think it was probably asking for a third party. But what does the Bible say about divorce? That's what they were going with. And we don't want divorce. This is not what we're talking about. This is not the purpose of this. The purpose of this series is to prevent divorce. And but they were asking, is abuse a part of it? It's like, no, I don't believe it is. Adultery and abandonment are the only two biblical reasons for divorce. And if there's abuse, We're called to suffer, but that doesn't mean if we have it within our abilities that we're to stay in there. In fact, the Bible nowhere says that if you're being abused, stay in that environment. We're called to expect these things and to endure them, but it never says to remain. If you have it within your power to leave and go to a safe space, do so. Because putting yourself in that abuse is just you abusing yourself. It is causing yourself harm. Now, that doesn't mean that you go through a divorce, but that does mean, in fact, this is what I shared with this individual, that even though that's taking place, you go stay with mom and dad or brother or sister, whoever it is, and you say, hey, I love you enough if there's a man who's being abused, I love you enough that I'm not going to let this happen. I'm going to lead, and I'm going to let you know that you are acting unbiblical. You are not acting as a Christian. You are being unrepentant, and that is not safe. I'm going to go stay over here with these people, and we're going to continue to work things out. I am leading you by letting you know that I will not tolerate this, and I am letting you know that we need to work this out, and before we can come back together in a healthy relationship, this needs to be addressed. And likewise, if women were to do that, the women are called to respect their husbands. You can do so in that same manner. When you step away, I'm not saying abandon, I'm not saying divorce, but when you step away and go stay with your sister or your mom or dad, whoever it is, you're saying, husband, I love you enough that I'm not going to continue to put myself in this situation. I'm not going to divorce you because of this, because I love you, because as the Bible tells me to, I respect you, and because I'm not even going to defame you. But I'm going to say is if you want me to come back, we need to address this in counseling and look to the scriptures. And then when we come back together, I'm going to respect you and not hold it against you. And there's a bunch of other stuff I've shared with that, but I think that's really the bottom point. But there is some suffering that does need to take place. And we'll talk more about that at a later time. Number 2, Jesus has a mindset. You had a mindset of Jesus Christ. Having this among you, there we go. Having this among yourselves, which is yours, in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. But he emptied himself, and taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. He had the mindset. Jesus he was king, he was sovereign, he had every right to hold on to that. But yet he didn't. He took the mindset of a servant, and I think that is because he wanted us to be. The servant is no greater than his master. And likewise, Jesus is setting this example. Excuse me. All right, I apologize for that. I had to go cough up a lung real quick. But Jesus is setting the example of servanthood for us so that we can be like him. We are to be servants like Jesus Christ, but ultimately for and to Jesus Christ. And then finally, self-denial, to take up her cross daily. That's a whole nother bag of itself. I would love to go further into that, but unfortunately we don't have a lot of time. I'd encourage you to do some study on that. What does it mean to take up your cross daily? How did Jesus take up his cross? What did it mean in that time period? What did it mean to take up the cross? And that's something we as Christians must be willing to do. And finally, he has a hatred of the world. If the world, according to John 15:18 through 20, if the world hates you, know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world, I got to get my pointer here. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of this world, therefore the world hates you. So because Jesus Christ chose us, the world hates us. And there's a bunch of stuff you can go in with that. Remember that the words that I said to you, a servant is not, there it is. There's the verse I just mentioned. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. And if they have kept my word, they will also keep yours. So what we have here is we need to recognize there's going to be animosity. There's going to be hatred. But ultimately, if we pursue Jesus Christ, if we pursue his righteousness, there's going to be that division. But among the body of Christ, there's going to be unity. So, I mean, that's a whole bag of itself. We'll talk more about that later. So, but what does it mean to be an exemplary husband? I think we're going to be wrapping up. I think it's one of our last couple pages. We're going to make this quick here. We're on 45 minutes. To be an exemplary husband, this is found on page 9 of his book. It means to serve as an improving copy of our perfect pattern, which is Jesus Christ. And that goes back to the likeness that I said, that this be ready for change, or this be ready to fail, because this success is not going to happen overnight. It is serving as an improving copy. This signifies the continuous process of our perfect pattern, Jesus Christ, by deliberately and intentionally focusing on and practicing his likeness. You know, those back in the 90s, they had those bracelets, those wristbands, WWJD. You know, that's something for you to consider. What would Jesus do in this situation? So we'll talk more about those things as this series unfolds. Fruits and traits of a godly husband: love, peace, joy. In fact, I've actually have a series we expounded on that deeply. And encourage you guys to check that out. But the godly traits of a husband is a loving husband. It is a joyful husband. When you see your wife, it brings joy to you, or your spouse, depending if you're married or not. You have peace in the home. You have peace within yourself. You're patient towards your spouse, regardless of how extreme they are on a situation, or regardless of how many times they fail. If they recognize, hey, I'm sorry, and they continue to pursue that righteousness, have patience with them, because we're all at different stages of growth. It is to be kind with them, to always have goodness within our hearts, and faithfulness, gentleness, and most importantly, self-control. This is something that all believers need to have. And I want you to evaluate yourself on this. I want you to look and ask yourself, is there a particular issue in my life, a particular area in my life, where I don't have self-control? And this could be having extreme judgments. I know a couple years ago that one of the individuals was very judgmental, very impulsive, very extreme, and that's in their judgments, and that's a level of lacking self-control. Another aspect could be your behavior. If you outburst, or you're lashing out, or you're continuously just seeing the negative things, and other different types of examples we can give. Those are examples of that we do not have self-control. So my challenge to you is to use these traits. In fact, actually, I think we'll put this in a series. No, you know what? I want you to do this yourself. I want you to get a notebook out, and I want you to I want you to go get a notebook. Really, yeah, go get a notebook and write some of these things down. If you have to rewatch this, please do. But I want you to write these down, and I want you to ask yourself, how am I failing to do these things? And we'll try to do that as we continue throughout the rest of the year, or through this entire series. But I want you to, the biggest thing I want to ask, what is some of the ways in which I lack self-control? And evaluate that and seek help. I'm not just saying psychological help, but, a mentor of some sort to say, hey, this is where I'm failing. I need help and accountability. What do I do? How do I overcome this? And so on. So those are some things. And finally, the last thing we want to ask is, are you ready? Like I said before, this series itself is only for those who want to improve themselves as a godly husband. And likewise, women, you can apply some of these things as well. Perhaps even help your husband, whatever it is, or show your support by sharing this with him and say, hey, let's go through this together. Bunch of different ways. But ultimately, if you're not ready to change, if you're not ready to fix certain struggles within your life, if you're not ready to be the godly husband, or in the words of Stuart Scott, if you're not ready to be the exemplary husband, there is no point in you continuing on with this series. I would strongly encourage you, evaluate yourself, put on humility, and take off your pride. Where is it that I need to improve myself as a husband? I believe that is all we have. That is all we have for this study. And as we have in our next episode, we'll talk about having a right understanding with God. Now, I would like to close up with actually three things. Number one, like I said, if you're taking part in this, in fact, I would strongly encourage you. I would encourage you to get yourself a copy of The Exemplary Husband. Again, we'll have the link in the description of the video for you to make a purchase. Strongly advise that. Strongly recommend it because there's going to be a lot of information in there that we are not going to go over with, and there's going to be a lot of information in which you can personally learn and apply in your life. Get yourself a notebook if you need to so that you can follow along, you can write notes down, and perhaps even take the challenge that we're going to have throughout these videos. So, I think that's really it. I had a third one there. That's what it was. But get the book, get a notebook, and be willing to accept the challenge. So, without further ado, that's all we have time for. That's actually this lesson wrapped up. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feedback, and actually, give me some feedback. If you like this, love to hear from you. And until our next episode, you guys have yourself a wonderful time, and God bless.